What's up, THS? I'm Mrs. Smith from the library. Our theme for this week is survival mode, and these are my top three. When faced with an emergency that threatens our safety, we typically respond in one of three ways: fight, flight, or freeze. The books I've picked for this week introduce us to characters who are forced into survival mode, and they have to make a decision about how to save their own lives. Our first book is about a group of high school students whose trip to Costa Rica is literally turned upside down when their plane crashes, leaving them stranded in a South American rainforest. But Mrs. Smith, Costa Rica is in Central America. How did they end up in a rainforest in South America? Exactly. This is Kevin Wignall's When We Were Lost. First things first, I loved the prologue of this book. It addresses the butterfly theory, which, as you may know, is an idea about how seemingly insignificant factors are instrumental in everything that ever happens. Our main character, Tom Calloway, tells us the story of this seemingly non-related college student who does some pretty gross stuff at a party, which leads to his mom meeting her BFF, which leads to his mom meeting the love of her life, which leads to Tom's birth. And then there are other incidents that have to take place to get us to the point where Tom is stranded in the jungle almost 20 years later. Another thing I loved about this book was the description of the plane crash. We get to experience it all in vivid detail by page 16, and it's terrifying. The plane is ripped in half, and only the people at the back of the plane survive. And you remember that butterfly effect theory? Earlier in the story, there was a kid at the front of the plane who forgot how to behave himself, which led to a teacher having to switch seats with them, which means that the only survivors were students. Students who quickly realize that they are nowhere near their intended destination, and the adults who may come looking for them likely have no idea where to find them. These kids are in survival mode, and if the giant snakes, jungle cats, and lack of food don't get to them first, they're likely to kill each other. Big Lord of the Flies energy in this one, and there's a pretty significant mystery to unravel. So if that sounds good to you, you'll want to check out When We Were Lost by Kevin Wignall. Our next book comes from the Battle of the Books archive. It's an action-adventure survival story about a kid named Peak who is trying to reach the peak of the world's tallest mountain. And at the risk of sounding redundant, the title of the book is Peak. Book number 2 is by Roland Smith. Peak Marcello, at the beginning of this story, is getting arrested for climbing the Woolworth building, which is a skyscraper in New York. Peak is a climber and a tagger, and had he not gotten busted by the SWAT team, this would be the 6th building that he has climbed and vandalized. The authorities do not find Peak's antics as amusing as he does, and so they want to make an example out of him. He is given the choice of 3 years in a juvenile detention facility, or his family pays a large fine and he goes to live out of the country with his estranged father. Peak opts for the latter option, even though his relationship with his dad has been non-existent for the last 7 years of his life. Peak's parents were mountain climbing enthusiasts, but his mom has since retired and settled down. They've separated, but his dad owns a mountaineering excursion company out of Tibet called Peak Enterprises. So many uses of the word peak in this book. When they arrive in Tibet, Peak pretty much figures out that his dad's efforts to swoop in and save the day were more of a manipulation tactic. And he wants to capitalize on Peak's recent notoriety as the skyscraper scaler to try and save his struggling business. And he's forcing Peak to climb Mount Everest, making him the youngest person to do so. So I went into this book knowing approximately nothing about mountain climbing. not a big fan of heights or cold and snowy conditions. But the author gives us information about the sport without the book reading like a how to climb a mountain manual. Um, Even knowing very little about climbing mountains, I knew that trying to climb any portion of Mount Everest is incredibly dangerous. Forget about trying to make it to the summit. So this book really pulls you into Peak's story. There are short chapters with cliffhanger endings that make you want to keep reading so that you can find out how Peak is going to survive as he gets closer and closer to the top. Book number one is the most recent book that has broken my heart. I'm still not over it. I'm devastated, y'all. My top pick for this week is by Jenny Torres Sanchez, and it's called We Are Not From Here. Our story starts in a city called Puerto Barrios, which is in Guatemala. And that's where we meet Polga, a 15-year-old boy who has dreams of becoming a musician. He's become the best friend slash older brother slash protector type of Chico, who is 13 and has been living with him since Chico's mom was murdered in the streets of Puerto Barrios when he was young. Pequeña is 17, and at the beginning of the story, she is about to give birth to a baby boy, but she feels no attachment to this baby for reasons that you will discover in the first few chapters. These teenagers kind of form a found family, and they look out for each other. And looking out for each other in Puerto Barrios is a lot different than looking out for each other in Kansas City, let's say, for instance. They are used to extreme violence in their neighborhood, and any given day, there's a good chance that they will lose somebody that they know, one of their neighbors or somebody that they love, to drug and gang violence. In the town where they live, there is a little convenience store that is operated by this kind father figure named Don Felicio. And he often lets the boys do side jobs for him in exchange for like soda and candy. So one day, Polga and Chico are unloading a truck of some drinks for Don Felicio, and they accidentally witness a murder by a local drug lord, Ray, who is just like, oh, he's just the worst. Ray, oh, he's terrible. So after Ray figures out that the boys have seen what he's done, he basically holds them hostage by recruiting them for his gang, and he forces them to traffic guns and money and drugs for him in exchange for like keeping his eye on them and making sure that they don't tell. So Polga realizes that they're not going to be able to do this long without getting hurt or possibly killed. And so they decide that it's time for them to leave their town of Puerto Barrios and go to the United States. And to keep Pequeña from experiencing any further harm, they decide to take her with them too. We Are Not From Here comes from this year's Project Lit reading list, and it's a very timely and relevant discussion about the dangers that many people like Polga, Chico, and Pequeña have to face, and the risks that they take to try and get to the United States so that they can actually live their lives. I do have several copies of it here in the library, so if you would like to read it, one of the other books that I talked about this week, or any other book, please use the library website to make those requests. You can use the Google form, submit a hold on Destiny Discover, or just send me an email and I will get you a book as soon as possible. That's all for now, and I will be back again next week with some more book talks for you from our library. Take care. Bye-bye.